due to the phase of my project and time limit, I recall the spiritual themes in only one novel. The theme, as I formulated it for the abstract, is quite general, but as I said in my today presentation, I will focus on one novel, titled Dziewczyny z Portofino, the girls from Portofino. By Grażyna Plebanek.
Are you trying to share your presentation?
No, I just wanted to write something on chat.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, the title in Polish and the name of the author.
Thank you.
So the title of novel is Girls from Portofino, and the novel comes from 2005, and the author, Grażyna Plebanek, was born in 1967. And the novel also comprised some autobiographical content. So let me start. The main part, the discussion about the role of spirituality in the novels representing Bildung idea, that is showing the process of maturation during exploration of social space, of the cognition of one's place in society, is not conclusive. Some researchers underline that origins of this genre date back to Pietist movement, other that in general the ethos of the Bildungsroman in the past derives from religious ideas of self-improvement. Ideas that Alison Finch indicate were secularized and politicized in the French Enlightenment. Another example, according to James Harding, Bildungsroman is, I quote, principally concerned with the spiritual and psychological development of the protagonist. Nevertheless, we may encounter as well the statements such as these of Franco Moretti, who points out that these are only Slavic cultures in which we may note, I cite, the persistence of a marked religious dimension which attaches meaning to individual existence in ways unthinkable in the fully secularized universe of the Western European Bildungsroman. Novel of the end of quotation. Novel of formation and of initiation has gained great popularity among Polish writers in the recent years, and it is appreciated as one of the most important models to tell a story of a post-1989 Poland. The long history of the genre involves new dimensions and modification of the pattern. I quote, the post-1989 Polish variants of the classic genre become a terrain for the reenactment of a clash of values. In the story of this generation, according to Svetlana Vasileva-Karagazova, one of the most important themes is the criticism of the nihilism and spiritual void that threaten to become new cultural dominance. In my paper, I focus on the question, firstly, is the analyzed example of the Polish Bildungsroman the novel of also spiritual development, and secondly, how this literary image of spirituality may be related to socialist spirituality. Two main studies on the theme of socialist spirituality in Polish Bildungsroman, the one I mentioned before by Svetlana Wasiliewa-Karagozowa, titled Coming of Age Under Martial Law, the initiation novels of Poland's last communist generation, and another book in Polish by Przemysław Czapliński, titled Poland to Exchange, Late Modernity and Our Grand Narratives. Do not comprise the analysis of the Plebanek's novel. They analyze many Polish novel of formation. Also, the other that I wanted to comprise, but I think it will be really a novelty to the field, the analysis of Plebanek's novel. It is thought Czapliński, who observed that the unmasking narrative strategies of presenting the Catholic Church in Polish modern novels are based on the language of formulae and body language. Partially considering also these themes, I want to present the following aspects of spirituality in the analyzed novel: religious education, sacraments of the Catholic Church, how religion mingles with the politics, role of spirituality in the home environment of the protagonist, and intersection between religion and corporality, spirituality and corporality. The protagonist of the analyzed novel, the girls from Portofino, are four girls whose names are Mania, Hania, Beata, and Agnieszka, living in Warsaw, not in Portofino, living in Warsaw in new blocks of flats, and architectural icon of communist Poland. Their development is presented in the light of their families, school society, religious education, first love, amongst other contexts. They are the representatives of different layers of society. The fathers of the protagonist come from the intelligentsia, as in the case of Agnieszka's father, doctor, supporting the communism. There is also a farmer who moves to the city and belongs to anti-communist organization like Beata's father, and from the most indigent layer touched by problems like alcohol addiction, like Mania's parents. It is significant that development, even in a so-called good family, does not provide support for daughters growing up. In the wealthy homes, they are educated mainly by nannies. Their parents are divorced. Family secrets hide their past and identity. The girls attend a school built as part of the propaganda campaign named Tysiąc szkół na tysiąclecie. It can be translated as 1,000 schools for the 1000th anniversary, to rival the church celebration of the 1966 millennium. That is the duration of the Poland country, which starts with the baptism of Poland in 1966. The novel begins with the inauguration of 1974 school year. That year, the religion classes were not held in schools, after Minister of Education removed them from the curriculum in 1961. Religious education is an important, multifaceted element of the novel. The classes taught by nuns show two contradictory approaches to such education. First of the nuns tries to move away from the naive portrayal of God as a good-natured old man in the clouds, trying to convey the fundamental idea that God is love. Her ultimate fate, that is the delegation to missionary work, shows that Polish schools do not approve of such teachings. The second nun presents schematic, formal approach, limiting the religion classes to copying formulae from the chalkboard or scaring kids with the concept of an ugly soul that might be evidenced by, say, bad handwriting. Her successor, a Catholic priest, is usually content with testing the children's knowledge of the last Sunday sermon. One of the goals of the religion classes is to prepare disciples for their first confession and the first communion. The importance of spiritual themes in the girls from Portofino reveals also in the theme of sacraments of the Catholic Church. The girls participate in many celebrations as the novel progresses. First communion and confirmation, but also weddings and funerals. The first confession is treated by the girls as kind of spectacle, where one needs to follow a script. When they can't think of sins they might confess, they borrow some from friends. They also perform confessions rehearsal, where they check their ability to say expected formula and follow the list of possible transgressions. During confession, one of the protagonists, Beata, I quote, was praying smoothly without hesitation or pause. These weren't her words. They have been invented, composed, and sanctified by someone else. She was only repeating them, feeling that this is expected. She would close her eyes and recite ready-made formula with dry lips. She was apologizing for insulting, abusing, and absence she committed so and so many times. She was guilty, sinful, dirty. Oh, how dirty. And then she was being forgiven. The voice from behind the lattice supported her and assigned a penance. The end of the quotation. We may note that the depiction of religious experience is devoid of a real spiritual meeting with God or his representatives on earth. Forgiveness comes impersonally. As I quoted, the voice from behind the lattice supported her and assigned a penance. The girls' dilemmas shows that they did not comprehend the ideas of absolution and conversion. I quote, because if the cleanliness was changing into filth time and time again, it clearly meant that she was not good enough. She was not worthy. Will she be able to continue without sinning for longer than half a day? Will her soul ever be really clean, or maybe there is no point resisting it? The end of quotation. While confirming the hypothesis that the subject of religiosity is one of the main differences between the generation portrayed in Polish Bildungsroman, I would like to note that the children are more eager to accept the sacrament than the adults, and certainly are more aware and even appalled at the importance of it. Their parents do not approve of it, whether because they hold high positions in communist system or because they simply are not interested in education of their children. Eventually, they express their consent because they simply want to avoid the feeling of inferiority or that they want to make their children happy, organizing the lavish reception or buying a ceremonial dress that will be better than that worn by a cousin on the same occasion. Financial details and material side of the preparation far outweigh the spiritual aspects of this day. The girls, although definitely absorbed with the material elements of the ceremony, are still more passionate about it, even if they limit it to reciting the script. On the other hand, the day of receiving the sacrament of the First Communion is not presented as a spiritual experience. Beata faints in a crucial moment because there is hot in church and she has not eaten anything on the day as the communion needs to be taken on an empty stomach. She also remarks that, I quote, if it had not been for the fact that I was given a commemorative picture, I wouldn't have been sure if I really had received the sacrament. After the ceremony, they do not mention their doubts of spiritual nature like before, like in the era of preparing for the first confession. Instead, they immediately focus on presents they received. I quote, Hanka kept prattling about the golden ring and the chain with Mary, while Beata told the story about a picture her father received as a souvenir on his communion day and that was saved for her by her grandfather. This strongly suggests that the religion classes do not achieve expected goals as they do not expose children to spiritual values, although they might perform a different task, shaping the patriotic attitude and preparing them to fight the communist system. Things that Hania hears in a religion class and reads in the materials suggested by her father contain two different approaches to one situation, something that cannot be reconciled by a young girl. I quote, Hanka tried to connect these two words, two languages, but she was unable to choose one side or the other. Fight for freedom and care about religious education are linked in the personage of Beata's father, whose first question after his release from jail is this about the date of the confirmation of daughter. Furthermore, the process of religious maturation of the protagonist is marked by the fascination with corporality. The first infatuation, closeness to a boy, take place at the time when the girls are preparing to receive the Eucharist for the first time and later for confirmation. The contradiction between purity and unchastity is illustrated by the mixed emotion which governed the girl's behavior. I quote, she was suddenly grasped by the sense of shame as by a seizure of the gripes. She did not have to do an examination of conscience. Cringing, she continued to feel a soft tickling in her stomach. What was pleasant was bad. She had to purify herself of that. I can also mention that the analyzed novel also reveals other aspects of the Polish religiosity that are not unique to a communist era, but can as well be found in the contemporary society. I mean here, for example, identifying oneself as a Catholic without actually following Catholic tenets, For example, to give an illustration, Beata's father criticizes his wife, whose father has been tortured by agents of the communist state security, that she does not understand his aspirations for freedom. He has a lover, but maintains that they have been brought together by a common cause. And when his wife files for divorce, he says, in the eyes of the church, we are still married. The novel also brings out the stereotypes about weaker approach to religion among city dwellers, juxtaposed with the strong religious tradition found in the rural areas. The new flats in Warsaw are dominated by crystal glass and carpets, with the religious paintings being tucked somewhere behind the wardrobe, whereas in the house of the protagonist's grandfathers living in the countryside, a prayer book takes a prominent place on a single bookshelf, and the painting of a Christ wearing a crown of thorns is proudly displayed in the dining room. To conclude, I want to reach for the words of one of protagonists, Beata, who remembers how her father, a member of an anti-communist opposition, said that by robbing people of the spirituality, they, this means the communists, will ultimately lose. The novel, however, focuses not on the communist government eroding the spiritual values in the Polish society, but rather on the lack of the latter among the adults, who are thus unable to pass them on to next generation. Eventually, the subject of religion and spirituality fades away as soon as the girls finish their education. It is highly interesting that when they, as the adults, return to place of their childhood, to the hut that served as a chapel, and now is the aisle of the church, staying in front of the entrance, they recall the rite of forefathers Eve, popularized by the work of Adam Mickiewicz, that is the ancient Slavic pagan feast. Some of them lost their faith, like Mania, who as a child prayed for the release of her brother, and her later attitude toward church is commented: if she believed in God, she would pray, but instead she continued to do what she did every day, that is to stand in queues, pay the bills, and study. Painting of Holy Mary, named by girls Our Lady of Aquarium because of the storage location, was offered to Agnieszka, who had known her mother, but it is no longer needed when she reveals the secret of her past. The goal of novel of formation was achieved. The ideas of education and personal growth were affirmed. Self-identities of the protagonist were attained through a dramatic and painful process of maturation, but any kind of spiritual training and experience appear in it only as the stage that must be passed and will not be crucial for a newly built world of post-1989 Poland. Thank you for your attention. These were few words about one of the novel.
Oh yes, thank you. Thank you for this insight into this genre of Bildungsroman. Very interesting. Thank you. Maybe here are questions at this moment in chat. I don't see in chat any question. Maybe virtually you raise hand, or physically, or simply start to speak if you want to ask something to Magdalena. If not at this moment, then in discussion. Okay, then let's continue. The next speaker is Tekla Svanidze. I see, from LCC International University, Lithuania, and I would like ask you to explain what is LCC.
Yes, of course.
Yes, and I will name the title of your report. It is Paranormal Belief in Post-Soviet Union Relations with Spirituality and Religiosity. Please, Tekla.
Okay. Firstly, I would like to thank you for allowing me to present on this conference. LCC stands for Lithuanian Christian College. And I would like to share my screen to share the presentation.
Okay, yes, please. Yes, we see you have started. You have started? Yes, we see presentation.
Okay, great.
Yes.
1 second, I'll make it on the whole screen.
No, you should push on slideshow. Yes. Absolutely. Yes. Welcome.
Okay, so firstly, I would like to explain the nature of my study. So this was done from psychological perspective, and it was a quantitative research. And for this reason, I will set my definition straight for this presentation. But firstly, I would like to outline what was the research problem. So originally, this research was about paranormal phenomena, and it was conducted in order to study the nature of the belief in paranormal in general. And the context of Soviet Union came along later as I was doing the research. And the reason it came along was because there was one research done by Torgler in 2007 that showed that people from post-Soviet countries have higher superstitious beliefs than others. And generally, the paranormal belief in psychology is very understudied. It is, there are two fields. One is animalistic psychology, which studies how valid these things in themselves are. The second one is parapsychology, that actually just studies the beliefs in paranormal phenomena. And in this field, there is almost no research done on Soviet countries, which is why I thought it would be interesting. But also, a lot of researchers have suggested that the suppression of religion during Soviet regime, it encouraged people to substitute it with something else, which was belief in paranormal. So for the key terms, the way I define paranormal belief was, for this research, it was a set of phenomena that has not been proven by science, but is upheld by non-scientific people that are within their society capable of rational thought. So to bring the examples, it would be like studying superstition, side beliefs. Side beliefs are the ones when we believe, for example, that we can levitate the objects, witchcraft, extraordinary life forms. Extraordinary life forms would be belief in things like UFOs, aliens. It would be Loch Ness monster, or as we say, снежный человек. And ghosts and precognition. Precognition is things like believing in astrology, in tarot, essentially the idea that there is something can foretell the future. Religiosity was explained as degree to which a person upholds a set of beliefs unique in their context, presupposing the existence of things that are superior to and higher than humans. And except for beliefs, religion consists with the attempt to please the higher beings, but it's a slippery slope generally to distinguish religiosity from spirituality. But in a way, spirituality is broader, and also what it does not include. They both have the same core. The core is that there is something beyond the material world, but for spirituality, for religiosity, it also includes organizational religiosity, which means going to religious institutions or reading the religious materials, as well as having religious commitment. If I myself, for example, identify myself as Christian, that is already more religious than it would be considered as religious rather than spiritual. So the main research objectives were to examine the correlates of paranormal belief, and I hypothesized that spirituality will be positively correlated with paranormal belief. But as I did the research, I noticed that with religiosity in the literature, we can see that there is no general pattern. For example, spirituality is more often, there is a general pattern that spirituality is, as if the person is more spiritual, they also believe more in paranormal. But with religiosity, these results are extremely mixed. Sometimes they are negatively correlated, sometimes positively, and sometimes there is no relation at all. But what I have looked into, and I've looked into the cases where when there is no correlation, and this usually occurs when people have organizational commitment, and also they come from conservative denominations, because there are denominations that allow you to have or prohibit you to have paranormal beliefs. So I will speak about methods shortly to get to the main part. So I had 229 participants. I chose 5 post-Soviet countries. These were Georgia, Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Lithuania. And most of I had for the gender, half of them were roughly males and females. Then for the religious background, most of them were Orthodox Christians. But as you see, I had people from various religious backgrounds. And for the instruments that I have used, I've used revised paranormal belief scale. I will also speak about this shortly. It is most prominently when they do research regarding paranormal belief, they use this scale. It's the most popular scale to use, but it has only 5 subscales, which is witchcraft, recognition, side beliefs, extraordinary life forms, and superstition. And I also added 1 more subscale, which is the subscale of ghosts, because I think it's a neglected population. And I also think it's belief in ghosts is also one of the most prominent paranormal beliefs, and it should be looked at more carefully. And for spirituality and religiosity, I used, of course, separate instruments. And in case you will be interested in the differences, we will elaborate on that later. So for the results, I've also compared the sex differences. Here you can see the blue line here is for women, and the red line is for males. It's a general pattern that females believe more in paranormal, as well as they are more spiritual and religious. So the first most popular belief was in witchcraft. Then there was ghosts, and there were no differences in extraordinary life forms. It was also low, and there was almost belief in superstition was low to the extent that it is rather disbelief than belief. But here I would argue that people in Soviet Union do not necessarily, we cannot say that they are not superstitious, because, for example, in 2012, Levitskiene in Lithuania, there was one researcher that conducted the research on how students, what kind of superstition students have. And it was a qualitative study. And it showed that, for example, in Lithuanian old folklore, if we look at it, we can see that there were some superstitions that were, for example, saying if you had to not brush your teeth because you believed that it would bring certain kind of illnesses, or on some days women would not brush their hair because they thought that well, the superstition was that hens will mess up their garden, so chicken will mess up the garden. And but this is this is exactly what's interesting about it. This is superstition specific to the roughly say village people and the village life. But then we have moved from that time nowadays to be country people, city people. Superstition did not necessarily change. We just adapted it to our current life. And now what Levitskina found is that they, of course, do not believe that you should not brush your hair. But Lithuanians still do have some unhygienic behavior. For example, they do not sometimes wash their hair intentionally because before the exam, students, or the boys do not trim their beard because girls think that water will wash away some knowledge, and boys think that the hair stores some knowledge for the beard. So I would argue that superstitions have just transformed from what it was to what it is now, and we have adapted it. And for example, also there are more sophisticated superstitions that if we would put them instead, it would show. I'm pretty sure it would be higher. For example, yes, it's more common nowadays to believe that, for example, water has a memory, and that you need to speak to it, and it needs to hear only good things. Or, for example, in Kazakhstan, they have a saying, "Na proroке стоять нельзя," something along these lines. Like this kind of superstitions, I think, would be more valid. So my results is that my first hypothesis regarding spirituality was supported, and I will be discussing this in detail. I want you to take a look at the scatter plot, and I have numbered it. Like you can see, it's divided in 4 quadrants: 1, 2, 3, and 4. So as you see in the first quadrant, where these are the people, and there are very few of them. There are almost no people that have high paranormal beliefs and have low spirituality. This means that paranormal belief comes along with spirituality rather than without it. And then in the second quadrant, you see high spirituality and high paranormal belief. I would categorize these people as the ones that are spiritual on the expense of believing in paranormal. And in the third quadrant, we see the people that can be categorized. They have low spirituality and low paranormal belief. These people can be categorized as secular or that believe in scientism. And from psychological perspective, scientism acts very similarly to religion. Religion and spirituality are famous for having strong health benefits. But so does scientism, in a way that it decreases fear of death and death anxiety, according to previous research. And then in the fourth quadrant, we can see high spirituality and low paranormal belief. And here I would assume that, so these people are spiritual, but they do not believe in paranormal. I would assume that they are the ones that are religious. For example, from denominations that discourages paranormal belief, or the ones that choose other pathways to express their spirituality. And here I would like to read one of the philosophers, Zuli Bart's, the passage from Hegel's Philosophy of Right. So here it helps to distinguish 2 concepts of religion that we often confuse. The first concept is that of religion as spirituality. Religion as spirituality is the all-encompassing orientation or direction of people's lives and of their culture and society. It has to do with what we find most important, what matters most. Certainly, the orientation or direction of our lives will show up in institutionalized religious practices, but it does not require such practices in order to show up. And it can and does show up in many other organizations and practices: political, economic, artistic, academic, and the like. The so-called secularization of Western society may well have shaken the ability of religious organizations to shape people's spirituality. That does not mean, however, that spirituality has weakened or disappeared. Instead, either other institutions have stepped into the breach, or individuals have sought non-institutional and anti-institutional pathways for their spiritual quests. What would be anti-institutional pathways for spiritual quests? It can be, in this case, it wouldn't be nature mysticism, of course. It can be anything. It can be political ideologies or participating in political movements, yes, believing in authenticity instead. Yes, so the next hypothesis about regarding religiosity and paranormal belief, it was not supported. They were not negatively correlated, but they were not related at all. And this I explain later in limitations, the reason for why this might have occurred. Yes, so also I did additional findings regarding, I compared from my participants, half of them, as I noticed, were older than 30 and half of them were younger. So it was almost equal amounts of people. And I decided to, the ones where I'm sorry, 1 second. So half of them had been under the influence of the Soviet Union, and the other half are have lived in post-Soviet world. And religiosity and paranormal belief for these two categories of people, of course, it was higher. There was some trend that it was higher for people that were born during the Soviet era, but it was not significantly higher. Although for spirituality, I found a significant difference. So people who were born during Soviet regime, they are significantly more spiritual than young generation. And then I have compared the differences between the countries among the different types of paranormal. And what I found is that Kazakhstan is the only significant difference that I found was that Kazakhstan believes in ghosts much more than any other country does. And also for this is also the same graph depicting the same information, but differently in case this is clear. And also I have compared the countries in total paranormal belief, not just separate ones. And here you can as well see that Kazakhstan is on the first place, and Ukraine has scored lowest on everything, on religiosity, on paranormal belief, on spirituality. But my justification for this would be that most of the participants I had from Ukraine were younger than 30. So, and here you can see the graphs for spirituality and religiosity. We can see that, interestingly enough, Lithuania, out of all the countries, Lithuania was found to be the most spiritual. And for religiosity, the first place was taken by Georgia, but it's not really significant because there is very mild difference between Georgia and Lithuania here. And as you see, again, Ukraine is low on everything. So the limitations that I think I had in my studies, I have already mentioned about superstitions, but some of the items I think were culturally irrelevant. But with my degree, I cannot modify the scales too much, but I would like it to be considered for the further research. And I want people who do the research and can create their own instruments to consider this. For example, testing whether people believe in Loch Ness Monster in Soviet countries, I think is irrelevant. As well as snowmen, for example, because every country has their, in folklore, I think we should take and add one more type of paranormal, believing in beings that are coming from our folklore, which is specific for every nation. and some items were ambiguous. But I think this is a common problem in case you're studying something like paranormal belief. Like if, for example, I received a question regarding the whether black cats bring the bad luck or not. How to interpret this, because it can be interpreted in various ways, and I will not elaborate on it currently to save time. And the reason I also think that there was no difference between religiosity and paranormal beliefs is because of heterogeneity of sample. This specific measure that I have used is specifically designed for only Christian population. And we have to consider that if we are looking at religious practices with religiosity measures, we have to also we have to understand that they are specific for every different religion. And Soviet Union was not only Orthodox, even if it was mostly Orthodox people, but also CRS was designed for mostly Protestant and Catholic people. And for the future research, I have my suggestions. As I have already mentioned, culturally relevant items are vital. The amount of paranormal beliefs that we investigate is very few, and I think it's a big matter. I think it should be discussed more deeply. And I want to the researchers to see whether paranormal belief varies among the different religious backgrounds, whether not only your culture or country, but how religion affects paranormal beliefs, as well as well, it can also be measured for spirituality and religiosity. And also the most important suggestion would be to conduct a really big study with a huge sample. My sample is not considered as small, but I think there is such a scarce research in post-Soviet countries currently regarding this matter that I think it should be like there should be a major big research with in order to have the data that is more precise, because I honestly think that some of the things were not would be different if the sample size would be bigger. And these are my references. Thank you.
Oh, cheers, really, Tekla. It was, how to say, insight into really fundamental and interesting psychological research. Yes, I would like to ask someone has question immediately to Tekla, or let's wait for discussion time. Look, from Anna Tesman to people. She writes, Dear Tekla, many thanks for your presentation. I share your view on future research. How do you value the statement that women are more religious than men? Are there gender differences in religiosity, spirituality in general? Tekla, please.
All right, thank you for the question. So it is, yes, firstly, I would say that the differences between the genders are universal. It's also a general pattern. It is very rarely found to be otherwise. Women believe more strongly in paranormal. Women are significantly also more spiritual than men, as well as more religious than men. But I would also note that, for example, in the different types of paranormal, if we look at them, there is only one type of paranormal where women believe less than men. This was not found by my research, but you can see extraordinary life forms where you have Loch Ness Monster, aliens, these kind of things. In this, usually, men, in the past research, men have scored higher than females. And my research shows that well, men do not score higher, but it's almost the same. They did score slightly higher, but it was not significantly different. And as for the general comparison between the sexes, why it occurs, there are actually a lot of theories, and none of them really account for the differences. There is a theory, for example, what is, if you think about it, superstition is specific to what kind of people it is. It's very widely known that sportsmen are superstitious, as well as miners and sailors. Why? Because they are living in uncontrolled. They are living in an environment where they do not have much control. And there is a social marginality theory that says that as women are more marginalized and they have less control as well, but psychologically speaking, there is something known as external locus, like psychologically women have less need for control than men, which actually goes against to this theory. But I think I have not explained it very well. I'm sorry, I got confused in my own words. So due to women being more marginalized and they have less control, it's theorized that they obtain more control through religiosity and spirituality.
Yes.
And also women were found to have much more sense of interconnectedness to the world, which is very highly correlated with all of those things.
Tekla, thank you. One more question from Agita Misana, religious sociologist from Latvia. She says, thank you, Tekla, excellent paper. And the question is, did you find any differences in urban and rural areas?
Yes, so thank you for the question. Unfortunately, I did not look at the location, except for, of course, the countries. But my research was so, it looked at so many things that for me, I thought if I looked at way too many things, it would be, then I wouldn't do a good enough job to explain at least one of the things well. But there has been actually studies done previously, and they're also mixed regarding the rural areas. This is a very good question. Usually, yes, there is a pattern that people from the outside of the city, they do believe in paranormal much more. But when the study was done with it's not about education. There are no differences. Like you can be uneducated and you can have educated person, and there is really no difference. Like you being uneducated doesn't make you believe more in paranormal, because they didn't find any differences between these types of people.
Yes, thank you. Then once again, Anna Tesman says thank you so much. Very interesting research. Tekla. Please, any other question, comments, reflection on this really fundamental research? Okay, let's go then. Nadezhda Gaevskaya, Russian Christian Humanitarian Academy, St. Petersburg, Russia. Русская христианская гуманитарная академия Санкт-Петербурга, Россия. Постпамять и практики почитания в современном мегаполисе. Post-memory and worship practices in the modern megapolises. Please, Nadezhda, will you speak English?
Dear colleagues, sorry, report and presentation in Russian.
Okay, it's absolutely
Да.
our official language. Russian is also official language of this conference, like English, and so please, Надежда.
Говоря о феномене советской духовности, можно отметить, что данный феномен находит выражение в различных исторических нарративах. Один из нарративов, связанный с современным опытом переживания советской духовности, опыта советской духовности, история, которую мы можем толковать как в религиозном, так и в политическом дискурсе. Это история, развернувшаяся в 2017-2018 году вокруг Исаакиевского собора в Петербурге, когда была предпринята попытка перевести историко-культурный памятник федерального значения на экономический баланс Русской Православной Церкви и сделать основной функцией объекта религиозную функцию. Вот эта попытка встретила тогда достаточно явный и сильный отпор в культурной среде Петербурга. И в результате реализация этого проекта была прекращена, или отложена. Одна из основных причин, там было много, конечно, причин, но одна из основных причин неприятия этого проекта обществом – это вторичный, отложенный эффект советской духовности, переживание опыта советской духовности, выражающийся в стремлении, в желании и потребности общества видеть религиозные объекты в их светском секулярном значении, как объекты культурно-исторической и как культурное наследие страны. Вот каков механизм этих процессов? Каков механизм поиска секулярных внерелигиозных смыслов для религиозных объектов? Ответить на этот вопрос мы попробуем в ходе исследования актуальных практик почитания имен блаженных в пространстве современного мегаполиса. Итак, я должна напомнить, кто же такие блаженные в русской культуре. Блаженные – это религиозный чин, чин святости. В группу блаженных входят юродивые, странники, старцы. И надо отметить, что люди в основном мирские. Сегодня в России есть культурные ареалы, где хранится память о блаженных, когда-то живших на этой территории, в этом регионе. Существуют религиозные практики поклонения, которые носят локальный характер и осуществляются узкими группами интересантов, в основном по конфессиональному признаку. Однако почитание блаженных Санкт-Петербурга стало антропологическим и религиозным феноменом, существующим в культурном сознании его жителей и ставшим ценностной духовной основой повседневной культурной жизни города и горожан, участниками которой являются широкие группы населения. Еще одна особенность феномена почитания блаженных в современном мегаполисе – это устойчивость в среде современных культурных, антропологических, информационных процессов. В пространстве неопределенности и постоянная актуализация смыслов почитания. Когда образы блаженных и почитание их памяти актуальны для культурного сознания современного петербуржца, передают чувство взаимосвязи с прошлым, с традицией, имеют охранительные характеристики и служат духовной опорой. Мы можем говорить о такой современной особенности осмысления религиозных феноменов в народном сознании, как восприятие в аксиологической парадигме, как культурной духовной ценности, когда религиозный компонент почитания не воспринимается как приоритетный. Подобная особенность восприятия может рассматриваться как проявление секулярного и расширение антропологического статуса практик почитания блаженных. Таким образом, мы можем говорить об антропологической ресурсности феномена народного почитания блаженных в культурном пространстве современного мегаполиса. О ком же идет речь? Вот я попробую включить презентацию.
Да, конечно. Да, что-то происходит.
Да, что-то происходит.
Ну, мы спокойно будем ждать, некуда нам спешить. Да, есть. Если видишь, что на слайд-шоу
Да.
Да, тогда будет всё полное видимо. Отлично,
Сейчас.
все отлично видим. Прошу вас, Надежда.
Да. Итак, разговор пойдет о почитании блаженной Матрёны Петровны Мыльниковой, иначе Матрёны Босоножки. Период почитания 1890, период прижизненного почитания 1890-1911 год. Но почитание этой блаженной, оно активно в Петербурге и сегодня, и сейчас. Очень быстро маленькая биографическая справка. Она родилась в Костроме, в деревне Костромской губернии. Вот это первая дата ее рождения, 1814 год, это дата по паспорту. Исторические изыскания, которые предприняты Ларисой Юрьевичене и изданы в монографии о Матрёне Босоножке в 2017 году, уточнили эту дату, дата рождения блаженной 1833 год, она из среды крестьян, неграмотна. Она пришла в Петербург в 1881 году после участия медсестрой в русско-турецкой войне 1875 года. И вот с 1881 года по 1911 год ее смерти она жила в Петербурге. Известна как прорицатель, духовная старица, человек, к которому приходили за духовным советом, и которая пользовалась необыкновенной популярностью в Петербурге. Очередь достигала до 300 человек ежедневно, тех людей, кто желал спросить духовного совета и искал духовного утешения у Матрёны Петровны Мыльниковой. На похоронах Мыльниковой было 20 тысяч человек народа. Это март месяц 1911 года. Руководил церемонией похорон сам главный полицмейстер Санкт-Петербурга. Речь читал протоиерей Скипетров, тот самый протоиерей, который первым погибнет в Александро-Невской лавре в 18 году и будет первым священномучеником православной церкви. И, наконец, было получено удивительное, совершенно уникальное разрешение на захоронение Матрёны Петровны в церковной ограде, поскольку в церковной ограде захоронения происходили очень редко, и случаи должны были быть исключительного почитания. Вот эта территория, собственно, на которой жила Матрёна Мыльникова, это территория, рабочие районы вдоль Невы. Вот непосредственно это территория самого стеклянного завода, бывшего стеклянного завода на берегу Невы. И вот, собственно, для кого она вела свою проповедь и кому она оказывала духовную помощь. Это фотографии 1905 года, это рабочая столовая и рабочее общежитие Обуховских заводов. И вот сама церковь, рядом с которым был домик, в котором жила Матрёна Петровна Мыльникова. Итак, первый географ, автор жизнеописания Матрёны Босоножки Александр Плотников, знавший блаженную лично, оставил свои записи под названием «Жизнеописание старицы Матроны Петровны Мыльниковой» в 1912 году. До 1918 года память о Матроне Босоножке хранилась во многих петербургских семьях, фотографии, жития, в церковных общинах и, конечно же, в Санкт-Петербургской метрополии. С 1918 по 1932 год, пока вот эта церковь, представленная на фотографии, еще действовала, почитание блаженной было заботой клира церкви, всех скорбящих радости с грошиками, называется эта церковь, которая была закрыта в начале 30-х годов и в 1934 году взорвана. Но уже тогда, в этот период, для многих прихожан и для многих, для кого имя блаженной имело большое значение, это почитание было в связи с опасностью репрессий и гонений было тайным. После 1945 года, в период от 1945 до 1992 года, это новый этап бытования памяти о блаженной в культурном пространстве города. Это память, которая была скрыта, память, которая хранилась в тайне, память, которая стала личным делом, индивидуальным актом. Она теряла свойства религиозных практик, переходила в форму устных народных рассказов и легенд, проявлений народной религиозности, становилась частью памяти в повседневном, личными воспоминаниями. Но фотографии, маленькие книжечки жизнеописания Матрёны Петровны хранились в домах, конечно же, в тайне. И вот в 1960 году власть предпринимает ряд антирелигиозных, атеистических таких попыток, проводит ряд мероприятий, связанных с памятью о святых в Петербурге. Это были циклы лекций «Общество знания», тематические экскурсии Музея истории, религии и атеизма, который тогда располагался в Казанском соборе, работа агитаторов из рабочих как раз в районе обуховских заводов. Это было связано и было своеобразным ответом на публикацию в журнале Московской Патриархии целого цикла статей о святых Русской Православной Церкви. Итак, вот такие пропагандистские, антирелигиозные, атеистические работы вышли под авторством Белова, «Когда звонят колокола», Алмазова, Гордиенко, чему учат Самвона и православные святые, кто они, Шамара, о чем умалкивает церковный календарь. И, наконец, работа Юдина, одна из самых тенденциозных, «Правда о петербургских святынях», вышедшая в 1962 году. Авторы этих работ противопоставляли материалистическое мировоззрение, идеалы труда, коммунистической морали, власти народа, противопоставляли христианскую мораль и идеалистическое мировоззрение. Вот Гордиенко писал об этом так в своей книге «Чему учат Самвона». Проповедники ставят верующим в пример не тружеников, а так называемых молитвенников. Приводя в качестве нравственных образцов праведников прошлого, священники подчеркивают, что эти светочи благочестия прославляются церковью не за успехи в трудовой или общественной деятельности, а исключительно за то, что они не привязывались сердцем к земным благам, всю жизнь проводили в постничестве и становились Христа ради юродивыми. Но даже Юдин в работе, опубликованной в 1962 году, не может избежать упоминания о культе Матрёны Петровны Мыльниковой в Петербурге, пишет об этом так. Даже и теперь, через 50 с лишним лет после смерти старицы, через 30 лет после ликвидации ее часовни и могилы за Невской заставой, былые почитательницы блаженной не освободились еще от ее чар. Итак, сегодня ситуация на 1992 год была следующей. Место захоронения было неизвестно. Точные исторические данные о старице Матроне Мыльниковой практически утеряны. И даже имя, вот по словам иерея, настоятеля подворья Зеленецкого монастыря, которым эту часовню вменили в реставрацию, он говорит о том, что даже имя, точное имя, нуждалось в уточнении. Таким образом, место поклонения, вот это снимок похоронной процессии, это сегодняшний день. Таким образом, место поклонения Матрёны Петровны Мыльниковой, оно имеет различные этапы своей истории. от культового погребения до спонтанного неопределенного места памяти. Возникновение спонтанных коммеморативов связано с проблемой поименования места, отраженного в одноименности культурного топоса. Находит выражение в культурном сознании горожан, порождая характерные особенности культурного восприятия. Мотив смерти, сам носящий характер неопределенности, способствует формированию пространства субъективного. Спонтанность места поклонения становится фактором конструирования во внутреннем и внешнем взаимоотношений между умершими и живыми, а также демонстрации принципов этих отношений. Через пространственное сопричастие с прошлым происходит и духовное, эмоциональное взаимодействие с ними. Вот это духовное эмоциональное взаимодействие и будет формировать постпамять и находится в основе постпамяти. Было проведено исследование среди участников почитания памяти Матрёны Петровны Мыльниковой сегодня и среди посещающих место захоронения. Исследование проводилось с 2012 года, буквально вот до 2019 года, и определены 3 группы. Первая группа – это посещающие место захоронения, причисляющие себя и к православным верующим, посещающие церковь и участвующие в культе. Но есть вторая группа людей, которые причисляют себя к православным верующим, но приходящим только на место захоронения и рассматривающим это посещение как отдельный акт. Они обычно не заходят в церковь, а приходят только вот на могилу Матроны. И, наконец, есть третья группа, люди, которые не могут отнести себя твердо и уверенно в категории верующих. Они смущены, чувствуют себя очень неуверенно в ответах на эти вопросы, но их ответы самые интересные и самые любопытные. Притом это люди разной конфессиональной принадлежности. Это не только православные и не только христиане. Итак, они говорят об этом следующим образом. Я пришел посмотреть на это место. Это интересное место. Узнать, кто тут похоронен. Постоять на этом месте. Поговорить с Матроной. Я прихожу к Матрёнушке, попросить о чем-нибудь, поговорить, а она меня слушает. Вот во всех этих ответах там больше вариантов. Ключевые слова – это слово «место», которое, вероятно, вот топологически определяет, и поговорить, попросить, она меня слушает. То есть слова, которые объясняют связь с блаженной, связь, которая носит, вероятно, в восприятии респондентов трансцендентный характер. Итак, в осмыслении этих данных необходимо обратиться к понятию о травматической памяти и постпамяти. Передающаяся через поколение память о советской духовности становится внутренним подсознательным травматическим переживанием, которое уже в новых поколениях изживает себя, снижает свой травматический потенциал именно в тот момент, когда субъект осознает возможность и внутреннее стремление к почитанию вне религиозного контекста. Субъект практики почитания как бы проигрывает то, что было доступно, разрешено и одобрено властью для прошлого поколения. Таким образом, вот в этом отыгрывании снижается подсознательная травматичность памяти о прошлом советском опыте, которая, конечно же, передается от поколения к поколению. Еще одна особенность современных практик почитания – это перформативность, которая понимается как персонализация публичных и политических вопросов. Потому что еще в конце XX века, в 1992 году, посещение места захоронения Матрёны Мыльниковой и тогда еще закрытой часовни, это был своеобразный акт, который выражал и политические, и общественные взгляды человека, пришедшего сюда. Место захоронения становится перформативным коммеморативом двойственной природы. Воспринимается как место увековечения памяти, совмещенное с высказыванием по социально значимой теме. Почитание как религиозное, так и нерелигиозное становится коммеморативным актом, сообщением, передающим социально значимую информацию, формулирующую культурную память. Это сообщение имеет форму свидетельства, сообщения визуального об объекте публичной скорби, который остается всегда на виду в культурном ландшафте города. Таким образом, коммеморативный дискурс почитания блаженной Матроны имеет два контекста. Это публичное и индивидуальное поминовение в практиках секулярного и памятование как элемент сакрального. Тема памяти раскрывается как запоминание в повседневном и как памятование, соединяющее профанное и сакральное. Таким образом, в постпамяти преодолевающее травмы советского. Вот это материал так. Please, questions?
Уважаемая Надежда, please questions in English, or, пожалуйста, можно задать вопросы на русском языке. Референт готова ответить. Я только хочу вас спросить, Надежда, может, закройте вот свой
Да, сейчас.
Да, пока задавают вопросы. Так, смотрю в чате и смотрю на ваши руки виртуальные и пытаюсь услышать ваш голос. Да, насчет этого реферата. Тогда у меня будет вопрос, Надежда. Интересно это было, что как бы проигрывается, если я правильно поняла. Значит, проигрывается еще раз как бы опыт, это, скажем так, советской духовности, чтобы справиться, уменьшить травму. Так я понимаю, да?
Да, вы знаете, это, собственно говоря, суть этого доклада, потому что именно вот такой неожиданный вариант объяснения в некоторых вариантах тяготения общественного сознания к секулярному. Да? Когда религиозный объект воспринимается как культурный объект, как объект культурной памяти.
Ну да, то есть как бы проигрывается то, что раньше мы смотрели, церкви в основном были, как Исаакиевский собор или что, или как Домский собор в Риге, концертный зал.
Да.
То есть это такая реакция, это не желание, чтобы так и осталось, это реакция.
Это подсознательные процессы, о которых сейчас очень много написано в антропологии. Вообще, это работа Марианы Хирш о постпамяти. И целый ряд еще авторов, которые об этом пишут. Есть культурная психология, такое новое направление в развитии культурологии, которые тоже пишут о изживании травмы, о переживании травматического прошлого опыта, который передается из поколения в поколение. То есть мы говорим о том, что наши дети, вот молодые студенты, они имеют подсознательно переданный им этот травматический опыт советского. Они имеют его на подсознательном уровне генетически.
Да, генетически, потому что социальная информация откладывается на генетическом уровне. Вот как интересный, в самом деле интересный подход. Но я хочу, вы сами хотите что-то со своей стороны добавить или продолжим в дискуссии? Если нет вопросов, я не вижу. Тогда спасибо, Надежда. Прошу, please, I would like to ask August Petr, independent scholar, curator from Latvia. post-Soviet inertness, tracing past through the oeuvre of younger generation Latvian artists. Augusta?
Hello.
Hello.
First of all, I'm going to share my screen.
Yes, please.
Okay, so
Yes, would you like to? Yes, absolutely.
okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Dear audience and colleagues, first of all, hello. I am really pleased to participate in this conference today. My name is Augusta Petre, and I'm an independent scholar and a visual art curator from Latvia. The topic that I'm going to stress today is very closely linked not only to post-Soviet and post-socialism ideas, but also to the field of contemporary art and the younger generation Latvian artists. Thus, I would like to suggest that it is also kind of linked to the art of future. The reason why I have chosen to trace the path through the oeuvre of younger generation Latvian artists is because as a curator, I have had the possibility to work with several young visual authors. As well, I have had the privilege to really closely see the process and progress of their work, and that way analyze the topics that they are interested in. And this has led me to a conclusion that there really is a group of young Latvian artists who both consciously and subconsciously speak on the topic of Soviet and post-Soviet aesthetics. And more importantly, they research the idea of identity and thinks about what impact does being born in the 1990s has on the development of their identity. Today, my presentation will be divided in two sections. In the first part, I will take a closer look into an exhibition that I curated last year. It was a group show in which 7 younger generation Latvian artists participated, and the matter was dedicated to analyzing the concept of totality, also regarding totalitarian political ideology. The second part, however, will be a visual and as well conceptual based study about individual young Latvian artists who really take in account the meaning of the unprecedented past, the Soviet past, in their creative work. And as I already mentioned, they sort of research their own identity in the context of the Soviet past. So as I said, the main reason why I am speaking on this topic is because last year I curated a group exhibition, Synthesis Study of the Truth Through Movement, Progress and Divergence, which took place at the former textile factory Bolshevichka in Riga, and in which participated 7 younger generation Latvian artists. Krišjānis Elviks, Anna-Marija Gulbe, Madara Kvēpa, Alise Sondore, Aina Bikše, Jānis Šneiders, and Miķels Mūrnieks. The exhibition was a part of my master's thesis at the Art Academy of Latvia, and the concept of this whole research was to investigate the idea of totality from etymological and historical point of view, furthermore examine how and why totality was so important in the Soviet ideology. In this exhibition, which was a curatorial project, I invited the 7 before mentioned artists to create new art pieces that would answer my question: how does totality conceptually materialize in the 21st century? Nevertheless, the fact that all these artists usually work with different media and in different artistic fields, including stage design and painting, they all chose to create site-specific installations. And while only some of the works engaged with socially political ideas, they all somehow reflected the artist's personal experiences and subjective sensations about belonging to the 1990s, meaning belonging to the last decade of the 20th century. For example, while Anna-Marija Gulbe's installation could be observed as an objective commentary on the past political situation, it was indeed strongly linked to her family and the memory of those family members who had been deported during the Stalin regime. At the same time, Anne-Marie not only worked with the memory of her older relatives, reflecting texts from diaries and letters and photographic images they had sent from Siberia, she also included references to her father's memory by adding a Soviet pioneer tie scarf to her installation. And as you can see from this image, she also projected slides over the wooden frame, where she mixed both pictures that her father had taken during the 1980s and 90s, and pictures that she herself had taken quite recently during the last year. So as you can see, Anne-Marie's work had many complex layers, and through each of them, she told the story of another generation, after all leading to a notion that only all these stories and memories together can create the future of our lives. Artist Alice Sondore worked with memory as well, but her idea and her stories were very beautifully hidden behind this powerful visual image. First of all, what she did, she chose 3 shapes of chewing gum, reflecting that during the Soviet times and also in the 1990s, in her childhood, chewing gum was kind of a luxury snack. And even if there was some kind of a gum available, there was probably only one type. On the contrary, today in basically every store, you can find multiple brands of chewing gum with any taste one can find in the world, and all very appealingly packed. So she took the gum she took these 3 shapes as a base and included 3 more or less basic images on the external appearance of these pieces. In the first object, you could see an image of minced meat. In the second, there was a picture of a hare and a wolf. And in the third object, there was included a picture of swans. And each picture was connected with a particular idea or a story. For example, the minced meat picture was a reflection on a paradoxical Soviet advertisement that really sold meat products. The object in the middle was a reference to this very popular Soviet cartoon, Nu Pagadi, which was originally created in the 1969, but was also shown in the Latvian television during the 90s. And the third image was a metaphor for Tchaikovsky's ballet Swan Lake, which had a really special meaning during the Soviet era and was broadcasted in the television every time something of a political matter went wrong, including when someone of a great importance died. The ballet was also broadcasted before the death of Brezhnev was announced, and also in 1991, it was showed in a loop when a coup against Gorbachev was initiated. The way these young artists linked the concept of totality to their own experiences confirmed my curatorial and also my research-based statement that this idea of totality itself can be recognized individually, apart from the whole idea of totalitarianism. And this generation of young artists who are all born in the 1990s, thus born just after the collapse of Soviet Union and right before the millennium, is allowed and can create interpretations of this time from an entirely different perspective than those who have physically experienced Soviet times. And what we all suggested in this project, and I am aiming to suggest it in other upcoming researches as well, is that this particular generation has been born in a time of intermediate state and has grown up in a Soviet-influenced belief system and also surrounded by aesthetical and design relics from the past. At the same time, our childhood is associated with the rise of capitalism in the Baltic region. And of course, this has influenced our personalities and identities as well. One of the artists who touched this topic within her installation was Madara Kvēpa. She is originally a painter, but for the show, she created this black box with a mirror on one side. She had also painted this abstract expression over it. And anyone was invited not only to take a position in front of the mirror, but also to enter the box from the back. And when one entered the installation, he or she realized that this mirror is actually transparent and more window-like. And when you are inside the box, you can monitor everything that is happening outside. But when you are out, you have no idea what is happening inside. With this whole idea and the work, Madara not only spoke about tracing and tracking systems of KGB, but she also emphasized the paradox of social media and how willing we all nowadays are to almost advertise each step that we take and each decision that we are willing to make. The most politically oriented artwork in the exhibition was this ironic contemporary sculpture by Mikhail Smolniks. The work is entitled Piece of Shit, and as you can already see, it is a replica of a typical Soviet statue depicting Stalin. In this case, although the artist has put the main weight on the material he used, and it was simply cow dung. As the visual form suggests, of course, this piece expresses the artist's opinion on totalitarian regime. However, the whole concept was inspired by a real story, an autobiography by Vladislav Urtans, who was deported in 1941. And in his book, Urtans describes one very amusing situation when an artist who was also held in the camps along with Urtans was cleaning the lavatory, and from the dung, he made a statue of Stalin. And afterwards, the camp keepers couldn't decide what to do with the statue because from one point of view, it was, of course, sacrilegious of Stalin, but from the other point of view, how could one even think of destroying a statue of the leader? This exhibition was a really significant project for all the participants and the creative team as well, because everyone who worked on the show is born in the 1990s. And although there is a very popular opinion that within this particular generation, there are no specific subjects or spheres of interest that kind of unite them or divide them from other generations, this very project actually showed that thinking about past and what is absolutely relevant, thinking about moral belonging to the Soviet past is an acutely important topic for young Latvian artists. This leads us to the second part of the presentation, in which I would like to draw your attention to the creative practice of individual young Latvian artists and the different post-Sovietism aspects that they are interested in. And the first thing that I believe might come in one's mind when hearing about probable connections between young artists and the Soviet past is, why are these artists interested in this topic? And could this interest be applied to any young Latvian artist? The answer to the second question, of course, is no, because it would be rather bold to even suggest that all artists from one generation, no matter what medium they use, could have exactly the same interest. I would even say that such an assumption would sound total. Nevertheless, as I have said already for several times, there is a tendency for artists to dig into this subject. And this has led me to an observation that there are two kinds of groups of belonging. One of them consists of artists who consciously research this subject, and the other group of artists touch this topic only subconsciously. According to such parameters, I will now focus on the works of young artists. And first of all, I would like to speak about those authors who have a conscious interest in this topic. Ivita Brūdere is one of them. She has just obtained master's degree at the Art Academy of Latvia with a series of lithography works. And her thesis was dedicated to the problematic of identity and such question as, why is she fascinated by the Soviet heritage? As you can already see from these images, in this fine technique, she imitated the Soviet era collection of dishes that she owns, paying really close attention to small details. She also imitated bottles of typical and very popular Russian drinks, such as Stolichnaya vodka and Sovetskaya Shampanskaya, thus underlining that all these drinks and dishes as well remind her of her childhood. Because whenever there was a celebration in the 1990s, These were the drinks that were brought to the table for guests, and these dishes had a very special association because they were only used during these parties, but never in an everyday situation. So Brudere kind of stresses that there were a lot of Soviet traditions that were still topical after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So they also have influenced the identity of her generation. In her latest work, painter Christine Daugste overlooks the idea of relics as well. Her point of view is a little more abstract, and she has combined painting with installation and found objects. And her main objective is the relationship between a human being and the surrounding context, including space, gender, identity as well. The main questions that interest Christine are: how do we today look at an object that has been created in a different time? And what happens to the meaning of this object and in this contemporary environment? So she also touches the questions of identity in a similar way that Ivita Brudere does. Krišjānis Elviks is also a visual artist whose main interests are linked to questioning identity and nationality from various points of view. In this series, Eastern European Quality, he speaks ironically about the stereotypical differences between Western and Eastern world. By doing that, he recalls his own experience in communication with people from the so-called Western society, who still are suspicious of those who come from the Baltic region and still can't differ Latvia from Lithuania or Russia, for example. Also, a material that Krišjānis often uses in his installations is linoleum, which became really popular during the 1990s and at the beginning of the 21st century, when the so-called Euro repair or Euro-remont became very popular. Post-Soviet visualizations and the rise of advertisement is a topic very popular also to artist duo Golf Kleiderman. In their exhibitions and graphic art, they use very strong references to the visual aesthetics of the 1990s. Especially, they are interested in recreating some popular TV shows or TV commercials and put it all and serve it all in kind of a pre-millennial style, as you can see. I once was showing work by Golf Kleiderman in a lecture for high school students, and they all ask me, why are these visual graphics in such a bad digital condition? Because they didn't understand that what Golf Kleiderman is doing, they're actually imitating this digital possibilities of the 1990s. So the younger generation, which is born in the 21st century, can't understand these things anymore. 1990s was a really special time in this region, and as in the case of Golf Kleiderman, a great part of this generation's identity is related to television. Agata Lielpētere and Marija Ulmane are artists whose interest in post-Soviet aesthetics might be labeled more subconscious. But what is interesting that they both have interpreted this once very popular sexual advertisement that was broadcasted in Latvian television after 11 p.m. And what I find really interesting here is that this was just a really, really bad commercial, but somehow it has really rooted within the memory of this generation. And last but not least, artist that I would like to mention today is Aleksandrs Breže, who is also subconsciously interested in the post-Sovietism. For example, in this digital graphic, he has connected a few symbols of Soviet reality, proposing to think about how it still influences the environment in today's Baltic states. Here you can see this very typical living arrangement of a Soviet babushka who watches TV shows like Battle of the Psychics. And what is important, this is a real image of a real apartment in Estonia that Alexander found last year on a real estate homepage. when he was looking for an apartment in Tallinn. And of course, he added the strange figure to the composition, but instead of a real lady, Alexander turned her into this extraterrestrial being, somehow encouraging to think that, yes, Soviet and post-Soviet realities are really important to our generation, and it is significant to be aware of them. At the same time, as I already said, we have to realize that the next generation, which is born at the beginning of the 21st century, has no real associations with this past time. And thus, the whole totality of the 20th century might seem quite strange to them. Last thing that I would like to add, I have at the moment initiated a new research project regarding the identity of young Baltic artists, and hopefully soon we'll have some more information to present on the subject. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Auguste, very much. It's absolutely extremely interesting because it goes together with what Nadezhda Gayevskaya from St. Petersburg tried, and there I can see very, very, very tiny line between people who have experience of Soviet life and these young ones who reflect and also somehow can help to overcome this trauma. Yes, and it's extremely interesting and beautiful research. I would like to ask, please, colleagues, sorry for my interruption. I would like to ask you, colleagues, questions for Auguste. The question from Magdalena Kowalska. Thank you for the presentation. I'm very interested in other sources of inspiration for young generation of artists for reaching for the past in their work than this of family memory. Older generation argues being raised in aesthetics of that time. Maybe there is also a kind of trend in fashion, or these are they that create this popularity. Augusta, look at. Are you looking at it? Yes, please.
Yes, I am looking at it.
Then please just think about and please your comment. We are extremely interested in.
So I think that being raised in aesthetics of that time is surely what makes this younger generation think about these aspects, of course. Also political influence, but I think that actually the reasons for being interested in this subject can be really, really different. And as I already mentioned in the presentation, I've seen that there are young people who consciously think about this topic, who might be more influenced by their family stories or aesthetics that they've been raised in. And there is this subconscious thinking from another part of young people who might come from totally different backgrounds, but they still have this interest. And I think that, yes, of course, this might be some kind of overcoming the trauma.
Sorry, my question is, okay, my question is, when you say subconsciously, you mean these artists simply have impact, but and this impact, this, I don't know, experience, aesthetic realities are produced, or what means subconsciously in this case?
Subconsciously in this case means that they there are artists who for years work on topics that they kind of produce these topics, and subconsciously in this case is that they haven't stated that post-Soviet time or Soviet times is what interests them, but they anyway have kind of aesthetical instruments that they use while producing art that like references the Soviet aesthetics. But
Okay.
it's not like they think about Soviet history when they create these artworks. It's more like they just have some kind of
Replaying these aesthetic models or something like that.
yes.
Yes, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Please continue on the question. Maybe there is also a kind of trend. Maybe this is in fashion, maybe political influence. I'm sorry, but it was absolutely necessary to understand.
Yes, it's pretty hard actually to answer the question right away, but yes, as I said, the reasons for creating art or also in fashion industry and also the way of thinking of the younger generation, the reasons for it might be very, very different. And I'm still working on this research. So hopefully next year we'll have some more information that I could share.
What is your research about exactly?
I am at the moment. I have started a research about the identity of younger generation Baltic artists and how older generations see these young artists in the context of the 1990s, in the context of post-socialism. And during this year, I will do 30 interviews with Latvian art professionals, including young artists. And then later on, I will also do interviews with Lithuanian and Estonian professionals to find out how what is the context and how do these young artists associate themselves with the past, and how do they see why this Soviet history has an influence on them.
Absolutely.
And do they feel this influence?
Yeah, absolutely elegant. Yes. Some other questions exactly to Auguste? Or we can go to the discussion part. Maybe we can ask each other, make reflections, comments on, I will remember, Magdalena Kowalska about Bildungsroman Tekla Svanidze, fundamental psychological research of paranormal belief in post-Soviet Union, Nadezhda Gayevskaya, something, well, to my mind, something very parallel, okay, with this item, but from the oldest generation, this way of overcoming trauma by replaying it. Yes, and Auguste, please, who would like to comment something, to ask to any of panelists? Yes, I'm looking. Yeah, I suppose I can't see in chat any question. I can see virtual hands or physical hands. Yeah, I see it was a very, very, very satisfying session, and I can understand that there is no question. Absolutely. Thank you very much, Magdalena, Tekla, Nadezhda, and Augusta. Thank you very much. And yes, I think I should. Ko varam darīt? Yes, then the situation is such. We could end our session, but there is another one report in a parallel session, after which we shall be back once again in this channel, in this room, for the conclusion. Please, please make a choice. You can stay here and wait, or you can go to another room for one report and then be back here or stay here for the conclusion. Okay? Yes. Then thank you very much. Thank you indeed. I feel myself very, very, very satisfied and even surprised by such a great jobs you all have done. Sorry? Yes, from Augusta Petre to everyone. Thank you very much for the panel. Unfortunately, yes, I won't be able to stay. Yes, okay, Augusta, thank you very much. I would like to say that Immanuel Volkonsky just sent some minutes ago, sent message because of health. He couldn't be able to report in our session. So the last report in our session is doesn't take place. Let's say to Immanuel Volkonsky from Tartu University good health wishes. Okay, then other room or wait here.